Welcome to my talk on Tacit Knowledge. My name is Ardley, and I have a co-author on the paper that I'm going to talk about, which is Sanngarri, Naikar, and we have worked on this paper together, and I will go through the issues involved in a paper called Unravelling the Unarticulated SME Managers and the Role of Tacit Expertise in Marketing. So this is the title of the research paper, which is exactly the same as the title of the talk. It's published this year in the Journal of Research in Marketing and Entrepreneurship. As you can see here, there's a link to the ahead of print issue, but it will in fact be published a little bit later on in the year. So perhaps the title itself needs unravelling a bit, but it's essentially about an alternative perspective on marketing management, which I'm going to talk about today, which is the area of tacit knowledge. So probably the best place to start is by looking at the nature of the marketing management discourse, or what we can call a textual approach to marketing. Essentially, marketing is drawn from knowledge of marketing is drawn essentially from a range of very important texts and textbooks. So we want to understand what marketing is. Usually the first place we go to is, well, apart from talking to practitioners, is going to marketing textbooks, and there lie the key tenets or the key operating principles of marketing. So interestingly, in these texts, their approach is largely prescriptive. If you happen to look at marketing texts by authors like Philip Kotler, Dib Pride, Simpkin, authors like that, Jobber, a lot of these texts lay down the way in which marketing should be performed. Interestingly, Gummerson, in an article from 2002, called it an imagined order, which is to say, well, does marketing actually in practice correspond to a lot of the ways in which it's talked about? If you look at a lot of the texts in marketing, a lot of the book chapters, it's set down as being very generalizable, something that can be replicated across a range of different organizations, very controllable, transparent, easy to access, relatively easy to understand, and not ambiguous. The knowledge of how to do marketing is presented in a fairly clear way generally, by key authors like Philip Kotler. So they're very widely available. Lots of marketing texts are based around the idea of writing a marketing plan. So here we are. Here's a marketing plan with objectives, a strategy, tactics, budgets, etc. Which is laid down as a very clear way to run the organisation. And that's probably recognisable to people as well, who operate from other areas of business, organisational behaviour and things like this as well. So what I'd like to present is an alternative conceptualisation of practice, really. So we can say largely that practice is conceptualised via the textbook, but is that the only way to look at marketing? And so we argue in this paper that another substantial but not very well articulated way of looking at marketing is to explore the area of tacit expertise, and it's routinely ignored in many marketing texts. If you look at some research articles, Captan, for example, 2013, tacit knowledge, doing things perhaps by intuition, is something that's largely ignored in marketing books. It's going to very often trying to understand marketing through the prescriptive approach. So one of the problems here is actually that tacit knowledge is ill-defined and elusive. It's quite a difficult thing to articulate and explain. So it does lack a detailed explication. And interesting enough, that's despite the fact that in small and medium-sized marketing, It's well recognised that they do marketing differently, but even so, in that case, the area of tacit knowledge is largely ignored. So this really raises an opportune void to explore, to what extent does tacit knowledge exist within SME marketing. So these are the research aims and the research questions of the paper. We wanted to focus on the need to understand the role of tacit knowledge in marketing decision making and to draw out the ramifications of this. If we can discover extensive use of tacit knowledge in SME marketing, what's the implications of this for future practice, for the textbook, and indeed perhaps for marketing education generally? So our three questions are: to what extent does SME marketing management expose the role of tacit knowledge? Can we actually find evidence that it exists? Does it contribute towards organisational advantage in SME? Was our second research question. And the third one was, is it possible to turn this unarticulated area into an articulated area? Can we make the tacit dimension clear? Can people learn from it? Can we disseminate it and say, look, this is an example of tacit knowledge, and here's some ways in which you can understand it? So there were the three research questions underpinned by the key research aim of the paper. So the methodology here was interpretivist. What we did was to conduct semi-structured interviews with 16 company owner managers representing SMEs. So largely, most of these people were owners. I think there was one or two cases where they were managers, but largely they were owned. We looked at 70,000 words of data. Now, initially, the original piece of research was aimed at looking at the sorts of resources which companies use to grow, like their brand, their resources, their tangible resources like plant, machinery, and also, interestingly, people as well. And it's by looking at this area of people that we began to get a grip with this idea of tacit knowledge. And so by revisiting the material, we got a grasp of this area of tacit knowledge. So interviews were recorded without rigid structure, just a broad list of questions we went through to get accounts of practice in these organisations. The respondents were importing, exporting, retail, telecommunications, business services, marketing, printing, corporate well-being, training, outdoor activities, hearing aid, and business consultancy. So we went back to the transcripts and drew out three themed categories which link to the tacit, and it's those I will talk about. And so it was really an in-depth view of these scripts. We got very close to them, and so in terms of qualitative criteria of soundness, there was the application of careful rereading, truth through, deep understanding, and the fact also that we exposed some ideas which could also be looked at again by other people. And we also looked at an extensive range of literature, so it was grounded in strong theory to that extent. So just briefly to contrast explicit and tacit knowledge. So explicit knowledge can be codified, it's easily transmissible, it's formal, it's usually very systematic. In terms of marketing, it's a range of explicit technical tools like portfolio planning matrices, a range of auditing techniques, analytical frameworks, the Boston matrix, the Ansoff matrix, directional policy matrix, even the 4 Ps itself are all frameworks which are largely prescriptive, and rules are created as a result of these frameworks. And I like the words of Said here, who talked about them being epistemological enforcers, the idea that these prescriptive tools actually lay down the way in which marketing is to be thought about and acted upon. So in opposition, well, perhaps not in opposition, maybe complements it. Because you can have both forms of knowledge working in companies, and I wouldn't want to stress that it's only tacit knowledge or it's only explicit knowledge. I think there is a combination of both, and it's perhaps what we're arguing for here is a recognition that the tacit needs to be thought about more widely. So you might be puzzled by the picture of the girl on the bike, or the person on the bike, but tacit knowledge is a bit like saying, well, can you ride a bike? Oh, yes, I can. Can you tell me how you ride it? Well, it's actually a bit more difficult, really, to talk about things like balance and so forth. So often, if you link that back to industry, it's about saying that a lot of skills have an unarticulated dimension, and probably managers are unlikely to become competent until they have learned the ways of doing things within a particular role. So maybe marketing expertise is only acquired once a person is in the job, which sort of does suggest, doesn't it, there's implications there for the marketing curriculum. What is it that's being taught? How useful is it? Is it useful all the time? So we're talking about what Greeks saw as metis, a form of knowledge committed to practice, knowing how to do things, wisdom, flair, built up through experience. And you can see there's a number of references to this. Tacit knowledge is rooted in action, very much dependent on where it's done. So one of the implications is that maybe standardized, largely undifferentiated marketing degrees or programs or textbooks don't adequately always prepare students for the working life in an SME. And that's echoed by Martin and Chapman from their study in 2006. So we had to develop a theoretical framework for the work here. So rather than just talking loosely about tacit knowledge and intuitive areas and experience and wisdom and flair, we drew together three elements of the tacit knowledge. We called these the intersubjective, the intuitive, and thirdly the situational. And we use these three tools as basis for our investigation. We went back through the transcripts, and this enabled us to answer our research questions. I'll just say something about the third question here. That was answered more tangentially. We just looked at our findings and suggested some ideas, which we think hopefully to some extent answered the third question. So one of our respondents, a skills training provider, I think very nicely defined what the tacit is. He contrasts it with somebody who's teaching by the book, using these prescriptive models. Book says this, the book says that, but the world of work is different. And so he draws on the use of business acumen, the idea that perhaps things are a bit more hidden, and they're not always immediately clear to people, and some of that acumen is only acquired through experience or recondite knowledge. That type of idea is probably useful here. So interview responses. So, I think the idea was that in reflecting those points I made, when we were looking at the quote here, it's dismissive of teaching by the textbook. That's something else, which is much more immediately accessible, rooted in the present. This idea of acumen, a deeper level of knowledge. So it's important perhaps to determine what we mean by tacit, and so that one respondent suggested what it involved. So the first of our three areas is this idea of probably what tacit knowledge is largely rooted in, which is intuitive. It's something which is just embedded in the actual organisation. So people working in the organisation will have insights, experience, emotions, and they may use metaphors to explain the sorts of things which are going on as well. So it's a metaphor could be a very useful way to explain what's going on. Maybe by saying something like, well, it's a bit of a black art, this. Well, okay, if it's a black art, doesn't mean to say it's something perhaps which is bad, but which is something which is hidden from, immediate observation. So surely in organisations, firms will operate on the basis of explicit procedures, operating a piece of machinery, customer service procedures, those types of things. But there's also perhaps a gut feeling. I've tried this before. It's not in the textbook. It's not in the rule book, but I've tried it and it works. So maybe we also need to be very much aware about this type of knowledge. But perhaps the key point here to make is that it's actually something embedded in the organisation. So this would be an example of the intuitive. This was from a print company manager. So clearly in this case, employees in this print organisation have customers. They have quite complex equipment which can do a wide range of different tasks for customers. But they're also saying that sometimes they need to be able to think on their feet in order to understand what it is customers want. Customer may suddenly come up with a particular query which does not relate to rules and procedures, and the person has to think on their feet. Well, that's a metaphor, isn't it, as well, for explaining action. So they want, and sometimes this intuitive feel for what's going on, a gut feeling, can only come from building up experience in that particular workplace. I mean, I can always remember talking to a marketing director of a educational software company who was involved in world markets, and he said we could get people in who maybe could write a perfect marketing plan. You know, they may have been recent graduates, or they may be very bright, may have done very well. They could, learn how to write a marketing plan, but they didn't understand the business, so that plan did not fit the business very well. So even the marketing plan itself, which has got a list of prescribed stages, maybe needs also to be embedded very carefully within the nature of the organisation. Second of our three theoretical framework areas is the situational. So in an SME, this is very important. It's the network. All organisations exist within a place, which can often be a physical network, or it also can be an intangible network made up of people. We really honed into this because within these networks, knowledge is built up. It's not in a textbook anywhere. It's in the heads of the people within the organisation. But I mean, this really does illustrate to a good extent, I think, the importance of the idea of networking, very practical area, building networks, the place out of which knowledge is generated, knowledge is built. So where are firms situated? What can they pull on in their local environment, really, in order to help build their knowledge about how to operate effectively? And so I think this owner-manager of a local digital marketing company talked about the importance of networks, saying how fundamental it is to their entire business model. So if you stripped out the business model in terms of this network, there would be a great deal of trouble involved for the company in terms of probably taking away its source of profits, its source of connections, etc. So developing that idea of a situation much more in a bit more detail. Anything we understand is derived from its situation. It's very difficult to take something in the abstract. So marketing management has to be seen as indexical. You can talk about the importance of a marketing plan, but the plan itself, which is written within the company, has to be indexical. It's got to be linked to that particular situation. So it's all very well knowing about what is in a marketing plan, all very well to know how you think an SME might operate, but it's only until you get into the situation you understand what's happening in the local conditions, the local business environment. That's also part of the situation. Okay, so I like this idea of the places that generate the knowledge. Where is the place? So it's rooted within. So, this is where perhaps exposing, if you think about an education context, exposing learners to different situations, understanding the local context, working with a local company, really understanding what's going on within that local company, and adapting and modifying perhaps the knowledge they bring with them to that situation. So in the SME context, it could also be their competitors who might be seen as being part of their network. The third area is something called the intersubjective, would be said. So we've got these three areas, got the intuitive, got the situational. The third area is intersubjective. So we start this third and final area with a quote. manager of a pharmaceutical retail outlet, talking about bringing people in with experience and then essentially being able to share that knowledge. So he talked, or she talked particularly about this member of staff who came in a relatively senior position, who had working experience with another company selling very similar products. So she's got to connect with the new employees, and so by connecting with these new employees, knowledge is being shared, and bringing the knowledge from that other company, and sharing it with other people. So the place is the network, and that place facilitates the intersubjective sharing of knowledge. Almost the idea of communities of practice, which is talked about by people like Leib and Wenger. I think there's probably a reference to that in the paper we write. So it's intersubjectivity, people connecting together, working in the sense of a local logic. What works best in this area, or what knowledge can I use from where I previously have been working. So it's very important is to share knowledge. Very interestingly, and I guess a lot of people have been talking about COVID-19 in their slides and in their presentations. Here is this, for the moment, for the time being, is this continued workplace socialisation being lost, as it's probably much more difficult to share things if you're outside of an office. I mean, clearly ideas and expertise, experience can be shared through a screen, but maybe there's a dimension missing if we're not actually all working together in the same place, where you might be able to demonstrate to somebody how to do something. So work socialisation process is very important where knowledge is exchanged. Our second question, so I think we've exposed that tacit knowledge does exist in organisations. Our second research question was saying, to what extent does it contribute towards organisational advantage? So that's an important point. Research question 2. So it's a knowledge within the networks, knowledge within the intersubjective networks, where people are working and meeting together in places which are networks, which help to achieve competitive advantage. And these can't be easily replicated. You can talk generally about the importance of competitive advantage, but it's perhaps only until a person is in the company that can understand what that tacit knowledge is and how it can work. Very difficult for rivals to identify what's going on in that company, but it's something which is seen to be done by people, and they might not be able to clearly articulate what it is that gives them that expertise. Customer service, you might have to watch somebody else performing customer service before you really understand what it is and how it works. But these sorts of things result in improved efficiency, value creation, and better financial performances. And there is some literature around which supports this idea that tacit knowledge is a good base of organisational advantage. And arguably, in an SME, it might be more widely dispersed as people resort less to rule books and perhaps more to knowledge that people hold in the heads of other team members, for example. So this brings us to the third and final research question. Is it possible to articulate the tacit dimension of knowledge? So it's no easy task. And arguably, I might change my view on this since we originally wrote this paper. Is it a good idea to necessarily make it explicit? By trying to turn tacit into explicit knowledge, is it best left perhaps within the company, and it's for people to go into the companies to find out what is going on. However, having said that, we might be able to access tacit knowledge through maybe a phenomenological approach with these in-depth interviews. If you get an in-depth interview going, you may be able to probe quite deeply. You may be able to uncover examples of tacit knowledge and get people to tell stories about, the particular nature of the network they operate in, the people within it, some of the particular types of skills and organisational advantage they exhibited, how these work, strengths and weaknesses of the people within the within that network, the strength and weakness of the companies, and the issues that contribute towards success or failure. So maybe you could get quite a long, in-depth interview, ethnographic research, phenomenological research, which explores exactly what's going on in companies. Actually, referring to an earlier paper, we did something like this where we looked at something regarding the use of business advisors and what they contributed to small businesses. In an earlier paper in the Journal of Research in Marketing and Entrepreneurship, we talked about business advisors and how they contributed towards either success or failure. We managed to draw out feelings on this through these in-depth interviews. Now, the other thing we recommend is that action learning can perhaps, it's quite good where you get people working together in small learning sets. They share practice without necessarily a lot of resort to textbooks. They share their experiences, learn from experiences, have those colleagues engage in a diagram with them. So both these approaches might unravel for learners some of the complexities of managing strategy, but it is a challenge and something certainly worth another go at in terms of research. So I guess in conclusion, the challenge is to try and render this multiplicity of knowledge meaningful and as part of a serious marketing discourse. It's interesting, isn't it? Marketing textbooks are made up of bullet points, short vignettes about how things operate in companies, very, very brief outlines, very little about the day-to-day life of managers and how they understand things like marketing strategy. And even in terms of SME marketing textbooks, they're often committed to deep understanding of established frameworks which relate more to SMEs, but nevertheless general objective frameworks. And in the literature there are some of these articles which talk about creating entrepreneurial marketing frameworks for the SME, and the issue is, well, will these frameworks containing opportunity identification, proactivity, do they work in the same way for all organisations? Essentially, we see marketing as a social practice as well as a set of business prescriptions. So things like intuition work very effectively, things like understanding other people, intersubjectivity, and the situation, the place in which they work and operate is very important. So perhaps controversially, we argue for a new type of SME marketing textbook, maybe by starting from the individual managers themselves and individual members of staff. How do they understand what makes marketing work in these small companies, and which detail is perhaps required rather than just lots of bullet points? So next time we go back and have a look at the textbook, have a look at it perhaps from a different perspective. Are there lots of prescriptions in there? Are there lots of bullet points? Are there very short descriptions of how a company was successful? Are the success stories fitted to the models? So that's an interesting point. So we'll argue that marketing theory, generally and for the SME, needs to reflect this tacit diversity. So perhaps by having it in textbooks, that's a way to disseminate it. And on that particular optimistic point, hoping that Tacit Knowledge can contribute very positively towards marketing education, I would like to end the talk here. And if you've listened and watched, thank you very much for your attention. And I can be contacted through the Lincoln International Business School. So thank you very much, and all the best.